And you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. We are on location at American University in Washington, D.C. We're talking with professors who are also authors. And joining us now is Professor Richard Stack. His book, Grave Injustice, Unearthing Wrongful Executions. Professor Stack, who was Troy Davis?
Troy Davis was I hope that he will become a milestone in the march towards the demise of the death penalty. Troy, I had a chance to talk to him. I met many of his family members. I think he was truly a strong person. I would call him a Buddha-like figure, a man who was at peace with himself, a man who I believe was innocent and wrongfully executed. And I dedicate the book to Troy and his family. They really taught me a lot about love and loyalty and faith and courage.
Why don't you walk us through his case?
Okay. 1989, Troy is a teenager, African American, in Savannah, Georgia. A murder takes place. The victim is not only white, but an off-duty police officer. So you've got sort of a stereotypical Southern melodrama going on here. Troy is in the wrong place at the wrong time, but not the trigger man as far as all the evidence I can piece together is concerned. His trial hinged on 9 eyewitness identifications, 7 of whom recanted over the course of his 20 years in prison. There was no physical evidence, no saliva, no blood, nothing to draw DNA from, no fingerprints, no murder weapon was ever found. These people who identified him said that at the time of the crime, at the time that they were investigated by the police, they were coerced by the police to sign confessions. A couple of them couldn't even read. They were teenagers at the time. They were scared. They cooperated with the police because they felt like they had to, and Troy was nailed. Anytime there is such a crime in a community, it's very understandable that the community will be up in arms, they will be in fear, there's anxiety. So the pressure is on the police to nail somebody pretty quick, and then the pressure is on the prosecutor to convict. But we need to make sure we get it right. And in Troy's case, who I think is the actual culprit in the crime, talked out of court. He admitted, he confessed to several people who later testified in court that he committed the crime, a fellow by the name of Sylvester Red Coles. But those recantations were not taken as seriously as they should have been. An appellate judge said, sorry, why should we believe you now? Or are you lying now? Were you lying then? My point in that question is, how can we take the life of a man based on 7 liars?
What happened to Troy Davis at the very end? I mean, when was he put to death?
Ironically, he was executed on International Peace Day, September the 21st, 2011. I credit his sister, in fact, I feature his sister in the back part of the book, Martina Correa, who was a very, very courageous soul. Martina really moved the mountain of public opinion in Troy's favor. I don't think the world would have known about Troy had it not been for her Herculean efforts. And there was a drumbeat that intensified over the last several years of his life to try to save him. And it culminated on that last day when it looked like maybe the Supreme Court was going to grant him yet another reprieve. He had 4 execution dates in his lifetime. I mean, imagine the psychological torture that's involved there. But ultimately, the Supreme Court said, nope, we're proceeding full speed ahead. And so his execution hour was pushed back about 4 hours, and he was executed about 11 o'clock on that particular day.
Professor Stack, what's the status of the death penalty in the U.S. today?
It's still viable. It's still on the books. The federal death penalty isn't used very much.
Timothy McVeigh, the last one?
Exactly, exactly. The action to repeal or maintain the death penalty is actually taking place at the state level. 17 states have repealed the death penalty. Maryland is very close. I happen to be a citizen, a resident of Maryland. Next week, a bill will be introduced to not only abolish the death penalty, but to use the savings from what the state spends on maintaining a flawed death penalty system. They're going to invest that in programs to support the victims' loved ones. And that there's a big tie-in between the money that we spend on a system that doesn't deter others, that doesn't keep us any safer, that costs a lot of money. There's a link there between that and a death penalty dividend that could be put into helping the victims, maybe put into more police protection, going after criminals that are on the streets. We've already got the guys on death row in prison who have been convicted of these crimes. Life without parole is a sufficient enough penalty as far as I'm concerned.
But when it comes to the money issue that you raised, isn't it cheaper to put somebody on death row, execute them, than keep them life?
That's a misconception. It's counterintuitive, but the expense that's involved with not just the appeals, but to get the original verdict correct requires more trial preparation, requires more security of the defendant, requires more expert witnesses. That's just at the trial level, and then you continue on with increased security at every stage. This is the one issue that the court system really, really wants to get right, so the appeals, move on and on and on. And when you compare the cost of keeping somebody in prison for life versus executing them, the studies that I have seen, it adds about $2 million to a capital case to proceed with an execution. And that's whether an execution is actually imposed or not. Often you've got these guys sitting on death row and ultimately they're exonerated, or for whatever reason they're not executed. We still have to pay the price of maintaining the death penalty.
How many people have been exonerated from death row?
141. That is since 1976, when the U.S. Supreme Court removed a 4-year moratorium on the death penalty. So the modern death penalty era begins in 1976. Case in Georgia, Gregg versus Georgia, and since that time, 141 people have been exonerated.
Or proven innocent or declared not guilty, right? Is that what that means by exonerated?
Correct. Now, a lot of people think that means that there was some DNA evidence that came to the rescue. Only about 17 of those cases were based on DNA. Many are based on erroneous eyewitness identification. Another person stepping forward, admitting the crime, for a variety of reasons, but we get it wrong. I mean, the argument, the irrefutable argument in the death penalty, there are reasons to be for it, there are reasons to be against it, but the one that you can't deny, no one on the political left or political right can deny this, as long as we have a death penalty, we run the risk of executing the wrong person.
Professor Stack, are there any characteristics of those 141 cases that are similar, that make, say, this was wrong, this person is X?
There are a series of reasons for wrongful convictions, half dozen or so. As I said before, mistaken eyewitness identification is the leading cause of wrongful convictions, not just at the capital case level, but of all cases. Other reasons, police corruption, prosecutorial overreach, there's an underlying racism to the system, incompetent defense counsel. There are a variety of reasons that sort of these various categories fall into place, and pretty much every one of those 140 cases falls into one of those 5 or 6 slots.
As a professor of public communication here at American, why are you writing a book called Grave Injustice?
I strongly believe in using communication for social change. My background is actually as a public defender many years ago. It was in those days that I saw mistakes being made large and small in the criminal justice system, and it just seems to me that communication is the vehicle to raise awareness, to educate individuals, and to move public opinion in the direction of what I'm considering a more enlightened point of view.
in your book, do you use any of your cases, your public defender cases, as examples?
Not